Thank you for joining us right now. You are welcome to Criminal Scene TV. Let's take a look at what is happening right now.
I've been living in Tucson for about 36 years.
And you live around here?
I live about 15 minutes
Okay,
from here.
15 minutes. So, what do you think happened here? As you being a Tucson resident, what's your gut telling you?
My gut is telling me that it's the brother-in-law, or the son-in-law.
Son-in-law. Why?
Just too many things. You know, he had pictures. There was a picture or two that came out, and you haven't seen him since. You haven't heard from him.
Radio silent.
The other people have, the family, Savannah and, her brother and sister have done things. He hasn't been involved in any of it, and I don't know if he's trying to stay away from the limelight or what it is, but I can tell you this, it's very suspicious to me.
The night air in Tucson was usually a comfort to Nancy Guthrie, but on February 1st, 2026, the desert silence became a tomb. While the warm and soft glow of her kitchen lights still spilled onto the driveway, the woman inside, a beloved 84-year-old grandmother and mother to TV host Savannah Guthrie, had effectively vanished into a digital ghost. Outside, the neighborhood was suddenly fractured by the strobe of blue and red lights as a SWAT tactical vehicle rolled past manicured lawns, signaling that this was no longer a simple missing person case. It was a crime of atmospheric betrayal. The hook of this tragedy isn't found in a ransom note, but in a crowded, sterile press room weeks later. Tomaso Cion, the man Nancy trusted with her life as her power of attorney, sat before a wall of cameras. After weeks of hiding behind his lawyers and the Fifth Amendment, he finally leaned into the microphone. His voice, cracked and hollow, shattered the silence. "I was there that night. And the truth is more complicated than anyone thinks." With those 7 words, the facade of the grieving son-in-law collapsed, replaced by a chilling narrative of a fiduciary bond twisted into a fatal trap, recorded in secret by the very heart Nancy thought was failing her. To the outside world, Nancy Guthrie's home in Tucson was a sanctuary of stability. At 84, she was a woman of routine, church volunteer meetings, no calls to her daughter Savannah in New York, and the quiet comfort of a life well lived. But behind the warm and soft glow of her kitchen windows, a silent, legal strangulation was taking place. The protagonist of this nightmare wasn't a masked intruder, but a document. The power of attorney. Tomaso Cion, Nancy's son-in-law, wasn't just a family member. He was her fiduciary. In the eyes of the law, this meant he was bound by the highest standard of care. Yet he held the keys to her bank accounts, the deed to her home, and the authority to make life-altering decisions. But as Detective Morales would later discover, the protector had become a predator. The trap was set not with a tripwire, but with a ledger of mounting debts and a shift in Nancy's own perception. Nancy wasn't a frail victim. She was a woman of sharp intuition. By late January 2026, the atmospheric shift in her home had become palpable. She had begun to notice discrepancies, small at first, then glaring in her monthly statements. The trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship was fraying. The conflict was no longer just about family loyalty, it was about survival. Nancy had reached a breaking point. On January 30th, she made a quiet, resolute phone call to her longtime attorney. The message was clear: she was revoking Tomaso's financial authority. She set an appointment for February 2nd to sign the papers that would strip him of his power. She never made it to that appointment. The fiduciary trap refers to the terrifying vulnerability of the elderly when their legal safeguards are weaponized against them. Tomaso knew the clock was ticking. If Nancy signed those papers, his access to her wealth and the cover for his alleged financial mismanagement would vanish. But the story moves from a domestic drama to a high-stakes thriller as the timeline narrows. 2 days. That was the window of opportunity. In these final 48 hours, the premeditation began to manifest. While Nancy was planning her independence, Tomaso was reportedly blocking the security cameras that monitored the perimeter of the house. He wasn't just preparing for an argument, he was preparing for a disappearance. The injustice of the case lies in this power of attorney, a tool designed to provide peace of mind that instead provided a killer with a roadmap to his victim's life. As Nancy sat in her kitchen on the night of February 1st, likely believing she was mere hours away from reclaiming her autonomy, she didn't realize that the man she had empowered was now her greatest obstacle. The trap was about to spring, and the only witness left would be the mechanical pulse beneath her skin. And in the immediate wake of February 1st, the atmosphere in the Guthrie household shifted from domestic warmth to a localized, suffocating frost. As the sun rose over the Tucson desert on February 2nd, the very day Nancy was supposed to sign the documents reclaiming her financial independence, the only thing louder than her absence was the calculated silence of Tomaso Cion. To the initial responding officers, Tomaso presented as the picture of a concerned, if somewhat overwhelmed, relative. And he stood in the kitchen, the warm and soft light now feeling clinical and exposed under the gaze of investigators. He told a simple story. Nancy had been restless, perhaps confused, and must have wandered out into the night. But as Detective Morales walked the perimeter of the property, the first red flags began to surface, not in what was present, but in what was missing. The home was equipped with a sophisticated ring security system, a digital net designed to catch any movement. Yet, when Morales asked to review the footage from the previous night, the server was a graveyard of no-signal icons. Just days prior, the lenses had been systematically obstructed, not by a power surge or a technical glitch, but by physical interference. The silent son-in-law had ensured the house was blind. As Savannah Guthrie made frantic televised pleas for her mother's return, Tomaso retreated into a fortress of legal technicalities. He didn't just stop talking to the family, he stopped talking to the law. While search parties combed the jagged arroyos of the desert, Tomaso sat in his home, reportedly cleaning. Neighbors noted the scent of heavy industrial bleach wafting from the garage, a sharp chemical intrusion into the desert air. The injustice of this chapter lies in the fiduciary's shield. Because Tomaso still held the power of attorney, he initially controlled access to Nancy's personal records, her medical history, and even the digital witness that would eventually betray him. He played the role of the grieving protector while internally navigating a premeditated panic. The investigation hit a wall of silence until Morales discovered the first crack in the facade. The prepaid phone. Purchased with cash 3 days before the disappearance, the burner phone was a ghost in the system, until a 14-second call pinged from Tomaso's primary device to the secret number at the height of the incident. Now, this wasn't the behavior of a man whose mother-in-law had simply wandered off. It was the behavior of a man coordinating the handling. Tomaso's silence wasn't just a legal strategy, it was a weapon used to delay the search, giving the desert sun time to bleach away tracks and the wind to shift the sands. But as he sat in that quiet and dark house, he forgot one thing. Nancy wasn't alone in her body. Deep within her chest, a small titanium casing was logging every second of the struggle he claimed never happened. In the clinical, white-tiled room of the forensics lab, Detective Morales stared at a computer monitor that held the only testimony Nancy Guthrie could still give. While Tomaso Cion maintained his premeditated silence, a small piece of titanium and silicon was about to scream. Nancy's pacemaker, a Medtronic device designed to keep her steady at 84, was more than a medical necessity. It was a high-fidelity black box. The data extraction began with a chilling precision. The digital witness didn't care about family loyalty or power of attorney. It only cared about the electrical truth of a human heart. As the technician scrolled through the logs for February 1st, the atmospheric tension in the lab spiked. At 8:42 p.m., the baseline rhythm, the steady, rhythmic thump-thump of a woman at rest in her kitchen, shattered. The heart rate didn't just climb, it spiked into a state of acute tachycardia. This wasn't the gradual rise of someone walking to the door or even the exertion of a fall. It was the physiological signature of terror. The distress signal recorded a heart struggling against an external force, a surge of adrenaline that the device attempted to counteract with a series of electrical pulses. For 5 agonizing minutes, the pacemaker fought to keep Nancy alive while her environment turned quiet and dark. Then came the movement. At 8:47 p.m., the device's internal accelerometer, the same technology that tells a smartphone it's being tilted, detected a series of violent, erratic shifts. Nancy was no longer in her chair, she was being moved. The data painted a picture of a struggle, a dragging motion that spanned from the kitchen toward the garage. But the most haunting revelation came at 9:03 p.m. The signal didn't fade, it didn't taper off into the slow, natural rhythm of a heart stopping from age. And it ended with a lead integrity alarm. In the cold language of medical technology, the device reported a catastrophic disconnection. It had been forcibly removed. The digital witness recorded the exact second it was ripped from Nancy's chest, likely with the same business associate's assistance Tomaso would later hint at. This data destroyed the accidental fall narrative. A fall doesn't result in a surgically precise or violently forced removal of a cardiac implant. Yet this was a cardiac event followed by a calculated extraction to hide the time of death. The injustice was now quantifiable. Every beat of Nancy's heart in those final 21 minutes was a line of code proving she had been hunted in her own home. Detective Morales looked away from the screen, the blue light reflecting in her eyes. The pacemaker was no longer just a medical device. It was the missing piece of evidence that would bridge the gap between a disappearance and a murder. The silent son-in-law had blocked the cameras and bought the burner phones, but he had forgotten the machine humming inside his victim. The discovery of the pacemaker data didn't just provide a timeline, it exposed a void. Detective Morales centered her investigation on the most harrowing segment of the digital log, the 11 minutes between the initial heart spike at 8:42 p.m. and the erratic physical movement detected at 8:53 p.m. In the world of emergency medicine, this is known as the platinum minutes, the window where a life is either saved or surrendered. For Nancy Guthrie, these 11 minutes were a theater of calculated abandonment. While the warm and soft light of the kitchen likely still illuminated the scene, the atmosphere had turned predatory. According to the medical examiner's interpretation of the data, Nancy didn't die instantly. Her heart was racing at over 160 beats per minute, a physiological scream for help. During these 11 minutes, a simple 911 call could have dispatched an ambulance from the Tucson Fire Department station just 3 blocks away. A professional first responder would have arrived in less than 4. Instead, Tomaso Cion chose the silent path. This wasn't a panic born of a sudden accident, it was a deliberate pause. Investigators believe this was the moment the fiduciary trap snapped shut. Tomaso didn't reach for a phone to save a life, so he reportedly used those 11 minutes to verify his own position. Forensic cell tower dumps later showed his primary phone remained stationary in the kitchen, while the digital witness inside Nancy recorded her heart's desperate failing struggle against a cardiac event likely induced by extreme stress or physical restraint. The injustice of the 11-minute gap is the pivot point of the entire case. It transforms a potential tragedy into a criminal act of omission. To panic is to act irrationally. To wait 11 minutes while a human heart fails in front of you is to execute a sentence. As Nancy's rhythm began to falter, slipping from a frantic gallop into a lethal flutter, the business associate was likely already in transit. The contrast in settings is most jarring here. Inside the house, a grandmother was dying in the silence of her own home. Outside, as the Tucson night remained quiet and dark, oblivious to the betrayal unfolding behind the blocked security cameras. When the movement finally began at 8:53 p.m., it wasn't the rhythmic stride of someone carrying a person to safety. It was the heavy, labored dragging of a body. The missing piece of the puzzle was no longer just Nancy's location. It was the soul of a man who could watch a clock tick for 11 minutes while the heart he was legally sworn to protect finally gave out. The digital autopsy of February 1st reached a new level of chilling clarity when investigators synchronized the pacemaker's silence with Tomaso Cion's cellular activity. At 9:04 p.m., exactly 60 seconds after Nancy Guthrie's digital witness sent its final lead integrity alarm, a new signal flared to life in the desert air. It wasn't a call for an ambulance, nor a cry for help to his wife Annie. Yes, it was a 14-second outgoing call to the prepaid phone, the burner device Tomaso had purchased with cash 3 days prior. In the world of criminal investigation, 14 seconds is an eternity. It is enough time to deliver a set of coordinates, a confirmation of death, or a single devastating instruction. For Detective Morales, this call was the smoking gun of conspiracy. It proved that Tomaso wasn't just a man who had panicked during an argument, and he was a man who had a cleanup crew on standby. This 14-second bridge connected the domestic crime scene in the kitchen to a broader, more sinister network. Following the call, the atmospheric tension of the night shifted from the warm and soft interior of the home to the cold, mechanical reality of evidence disposal. Shortly after the call ended, a single, one-word text message was sent from the burner phone back to a secondary business associate vehicle, handled. This one word, handled, encapsulated the profound injustice of the case. It stripped Nancy Guthrie of her humanity, reducing an 84-year-old grandmother, a pillar of her community and a mother, to a situation that had been resolved. To the conspirators, Nancy was no longer a person, she was a liability that had been successfully mitigated. As the educational theme of this chapter focuses on the conspiracy of silence. By involving a second person, the unidentified associate, seen in the grainier-than-usual neighbor's doorbell footage, Tomaso had crossed a line from a crime of passion into a criminal enterprise. The second vehicle, a dark-colored SUV, was seen pulling away from the Guthrie residence minutes after the handled message was sent. Detective Morales realized that handled didn't just mean the body was gone. It meant the evidence had been scrubbed. The 14-second call was the catalyst for the SUV's departure toward the Tucson desert, a journey that would be tracked via desert pings from tower to tower. As Savannah Guthrie sat in a television studio thousands of miles away, oblivious to the fact that her mother's life had been reduced to a one-word status update, the handled message became the digital epitaph of a betrayal that was as cold as the desert night. As the clock struck 9:15 p.m., the warm and soft safety of the Tucson suburbs was left behind in the rear-view mirror of a dark SUV. The investigation now shifted its focus to the vast, unforgiving topography of the Arizona desert. While Tomaso Cion remained at the house, presumably scrubbing the kitchen tiles of any physical trace of the struggle, the business associate was in motion. This journey was not recorded by security cameras, which had been meticulously avoided, but by the invisible architecture of cellular networks. Detective Morales tracked the desert pings like a digital breadcrumb trail. The burner phone, now traveling in the secondary vehicle, began leaping from tower to tower along the Interstate 10 corridor before veering sharply toward the Saguaro National Park east. Each ping provided a timestamp and a geographical radius, and narrowing the search area from hundreds of square miles to a specific, jagged stretch of the Rincon Mountains. The pacing of the story at this point mirrors the drive, rapid, rhythmic, and increasingly desolate. At 9:42 p.m., the signal hit a tower near Old Spanish Trail. Then at 9:51 p.m., the movement stopped. For exactly 9 minutes, the phone went stationary in the quiet and dark heart of the desert. In the world of forensics, 9 minutes is a specific, haunting duration. And it is too short to dig a grave in the rocky, caliche-hardened soil of the Sonoran Desert, but it is exactly long enough to handle the disposal of portable evidence. Morales realized that this wasn't the final resting place of Nancy Guthrie. It was a dump site for the missing pieces that could link the crime to the man. The atmospheric contrast here is chilling. While Savannah Guthrie was likely preparing for her next broadcast, unaware that her mother's digital heartbeat had been silenced, and a masked figure was standing in the desert wind, discarding the remnants of a life. The desert pings revealed a calculated stop and start pattern that suggested the driver was looking for a specific landmark, a premeditated location chosen days in advance during the purchase of the burner phone. The injustice of this chapter is the cold utility of the desert. To the conspirators, the wilderness wasn't a place of beauty, but a vast, silent accomplice. And they relied on the quiet and dark to swallow the evidence of their breach of trust. But the desert, much like the Pacemaker, keeps its own records. The 9-minute stop became the X on Morales' map. As the SUV eventually turned back toward the city, leaving the missing pieces behind, the digital trail was already being etched into the police server, waiting for the sunrise to reveal what the darkness tried to hide. The Arizona sun rose on February 4th with a blinding, indifferent clarity and illuminating the jagged peaks of the Rincon Mountains. Following the desert pings like a digital map to a hidden grave, Detective Morales led a specialized search and recovery team to the exact coordinates where the burner phone had sat stationary for those haunting 9 minutes. The setting was a stark departure from the warm and soft kitchen in Tucson. Here, the ground was a mosaic of sun-baked caliche, brittle creosote, and the long, reaching shadows of saguaro cacti. For hours, as the team moved in a slow, rhythmic skirmish line, their eyes scanning for anything that looked handled by human hands. The breakthrough didn't come from a deep grave, but from a shallow disturbance near the base of a dry wash. Beneath a thin layer of sand and desert scrub, a corner of industrial fabric poked through the earth, a heavy navy blue moving blanket. As the team meticulously brushed away the soil, as the atmospheric setting of the crime shifted from a disappearance to a forensic reality. Wrapped within the coarse fibers of the blanket was the first physical confirmation of the pacemaker's final log. There, resting in the dust, was the bent pacemaker casing. The small titanium puck, once a lifeline nestled beneath Nancy Guthrie's skin, was now a piece of mangled evidence. Forensic technicians noted the distinct tool marks on the metal, scratches and indentations that suggested it hadn't just been removed, but pried away with a cold, mechanical force. This was the missing piece that shattered Tomaso Cion's narrative of an accidental fall. One does not bury a medical device in the desert after an accident, one buries it to kill the data. Beside the casing, beside the issues. IG investigators found a pair of discarded surgical gloves and a receipt for the prepaid phone. partially burned but still legible enough to show a cash transaction from 3 days prior. The injustice of the scene was palpable. This wasn't a burial of a human being, it was a disposal of a situation. Nancy's dignity had been stripped away, her medical history tossed into a dry creek bed like common refuse. Yes, the educational theme of this chapter focuses on the persistence of evidence. Tomaso and his business associate believed the desert's quiet and dark would act as a permanent delete key. They relied on the vastness of the landscape to swallow the breach of trust. But the very precision of the digital witness led Morales to this exact patch of sand. As the sun reached its zenith, Morales held the evidence bag containing the bent casing. The missing piece was finally in hand, but the weight of the discovery was heavy. The pacemaker had told them when she died and how she was moved, but it couldn't tell them where she was now. The desert had given up the machine, but it was still holding on to the woman. The air in the Tucson Police Department's interview room 4 was stripped of the desert's vastness. It was a space of 4 beige walls, a heavy steel table, and the hum of a ventilation system that felt like a countdown. Tomaso Cion sat across from Detective Morales, and his posture a carefully curated mask of premeditated grief. He still wore the expensive watch Nancy had gifted him for his anniversary, a gold-plated reminder of the fiduciary bond he had systematically dismantled. Morales didn't start with the pacemaker. She started with the warm and soft kitchen, inviting Tomaso to recount the accident one more time. He leaned into the lie with practiced ease, describing a sudden fall, a moment of panic, how in a frantic attempt to find Nancy after she wandered off into the night. His tone was somber, almost rehearsed. But as he spoke, Morales reached beneath the table and produced a small, clear evidence bag. Inside was the bent pacemaker casing, still dusted with the pale sand of the Rincon Mountains. The atmospheric shift was instantaneous. The quiet and dark of the desert seemed to follow the object into the room. Tomaso's voice faltered mid-sentence, and his eyes locking onto the mangled titanium puck. This was the missing piece he thought the desert had swallowed. "The data doesn't lie, Tomaso," Morales said, her voice a low, steady anchor in the rising tension. At 8:42 p.m., her heart spiked. At 9:03 p.m., this device was ripped from her chest. And at 9:04 p.m., you called a burner phone. 14 seconds. You had enough time to tell someone to handle the situation. The interrogation room showdown reached its climax when Morales slid a printed copy of the 14-second call log across the steel table. The injustice of his silence was finally being crushed by the weight of the digital witness. Tomaso's mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. He began to shake, his hands gripping the edge of the table as the fiduciary trap he had built for Nancy turned into his own cage. "Oh, she wasn't alone," he finally whispered, his first admission of a conspiracy. The room went cold. I panicked. He said he could make the problem go away. The business associate, he took her. I just wanted the financial authority back. I didn't want this. This admission transformed the case from a domestic dispute into a hunt for a second predator. Tomaso's desire for financial control, his deep flaw, had led him to invite a masked figure into a grandmother's sanctuary. The conflict was no longer about a missing person, it was about a man who had sold his mother-in-law's life for a ledger of debts. As Morales signaled the officers outside to begin the formal arrest process, the whodunit layer deepened. Tomaso had broken his silence, but the business associate and Nancy's final resting place remained ghosts in the Arizona wind. The arrest of Tomaso Cion did not bring the silence of a closed book. Instead, it opened a deafening chapter of grief for the Guthrie family. As the news broke across national headlines, the warm and soft memories of Nancy's home were replaced by the clinical reality of a crime scene. For Savannah Guthrie and her siblings, the injustice wasn't just in the loss of their mother, but in the clinical betrayal by the man who sat at their Thanksgiving table. A man who had traded a grandmother's life for a fiduciary advantage. There's Tomaso with manslaughter, conspiracy, and Tomaso with manslaughter, conspiracy, and tampering with physical evidence. However, the missing piece remained the most agonizing: the location of Nancy's body. While the pacemaker had testified to her final moments, the business associate, the masked figure seen in the desert shadows, remained a ghost in the system. The search shifted from a rescue mission to a grim, systematic recovery effort, with K-9 units and ground-penetrating radar scouring the quiet and dark washes of the Rincon Mountains. In a televised plea that broke the heart of the nation, Savannah Guthrie spoke directly to the second person involved. Her voice, usually steady and professional, caught with the weight of an atmospheric tragedy. We have the data, we have the timeline, all we want now is the truth. We want to bring her home. Her plea highlighted the transformation of the family. They were no longer just survivors of a disappearance, they were crusaders for justice against a hidden conspiracy. The story concludes not with a neat resolution, but with a haunting transformation. Annie, Nancy's daughter and Tomaso's wife, stood as the ultimate symbol of the shattered bond. Initially defending her husband, yet the digital witness of the pacemaker data forced her to confront a reality where the man she loved was the architect of her mother's end. The fiduciary trap had claimed more than just Nancy. It had liquidated the trust of an entire lineage. As the sun sets over Tucson, the desert remains quiet and dark, holding its secrets close. And the case of Nancy Guthrie serves as a stark reminder that while technology can reconstruct the how and the when, the where is often left to the conscience of those who remain. The search continues, driven by a daughter's love and a detective's promise that no business associate can stay hidden forever. The final image of the case is not one of a courtroom, but of a desert horizon, waiting for the day the silence finally breaks for good.